key themes that stand out. One of our themes this year is transparent, accessible information for more informed Ontarians. Transparent and accessible information can help Ontarians make more informed decisions about things that are important to them, their own health, their families, and their finances. More information can lead to better outcomes for Ontarians and a better quality of life. A few examples from our audits this year where public education and awareness can make a difference include: our audit on cardiac disease and stroke treatment found that in 2019-20, about 30% of patients, almost 12,000 people, who arrived in an emergency department with stroke symptoms did not go to the type of site, such as a stroke center, best suited for stroke treatment and care. If paramedics determine a stroke has likely occurred, instead of taking the person to the nearest hospital, they generally go to the hospital specialized in stroke care. However, patients who go to a hospital on their own may unknowingly go to a hospital that is not as well suited to treat a stroke. Further education is needed to help Ontarians identify that a stroke is happening and to call an ambulance. The Ontario Securities Commission is the largest capital market regulator in Canada. It is important that the public be aware that in Ontario and the rest of Canada, there is no fiduciary duty requirement for advisors, dealers, and their representatives to act in the best interests of their clients. Our audit of the Ontario Securities Commission confirmed that deferred sales charges and trailing commissions have taken over a decade to be banned. And although trailing commissions will be prohibited for discount brokers and dealers, that is, dealers who are not permitted under existing regulations to provide advice to investors, effective June 1, 2022, under the proposed rules, they will still be permitted for full-service dealers. Many investors do not know how much they pay in these hidden fees or that they pay them at all. These sales practices cost Ontario investors an estimated $13.7 billion in commissions paid from 2016 to 2020. By contrast, security regulators in the United Kingdom and Australia have banned these types of embedded commissions since 2012. We noted in our audit of Ontario Cannabis Retail Corporation that more action is required on social responsibility, including educating the public on responsible consumption, health risks, and the differences between regulated and unregulated cannabis products. Our audit of assisted living services found that familiarity with these services is low among the public, and information on these services may be difficult to find. In fact, neither the Ministry of Health, many of the health regions, nor Ontario Health tracked locations of where assisted living services were provided, and Ontario Health had to compile this information when we asked as part of our audit. This general lack of information represents a significant barrier to vulnerable people finding the help they need to live safely and comfortably in their homes and to avoid long-term care or hospitalization. The 5G network is posed to be a game changer, with the power to fuel innovation and transform the way we live, work, and play. Our audit of 5G technology and the related pre-commercial 5G program highlighted that legislation currently in place in Ontario to protect privacy and ensure data security predates emerging technologies such as 5G. The province has commenced preliminary work to update relevant legislation. We found in our audit of outpatient surgeries that more information on wait times would allow Ontarians to make more informed choices about their health care. Surgeons at the same hospital can have significantly different wait times. For example, average wait time for one ophthalmologist was almost 4 times longer than another. But surgeon wait times are not tracked or publicly reported in Ontario. In contrast, Alberta and British Columbia publicly report wait times by surgeon. In our audit of oversight of private career colleges, we found that when the Ministry of Colleges and Universities posts information on private career colleges' graduation rates and graduate employment rates, the information is at least 2 years old. But for up to 83% of college programs, performance indicators are not available at all. Also, the ministry does not analyze complaints about colleges or publish repeat complaints. As a result, students are missing important information when making decisions about their vocational training. Our audit of land use planning in the Greater Golden Horseshoe found that unprecedented use of ministers' zoning orders compounded with numerous changes to growth plan policies, have created instability in the planning process. The lack of transparency in issuing MZOs opens the process to criticisms of conflict of interest and unfairness. There is no formal process that interested parties are required to follow to request an MZO, and there are no established criteria against which the minister assesses requests for MZOs. A second thematic area addressed by our audits is service delivery for Ontarians. Frontline policing by the Ontario Provincial Police is important for public safety. In our audit of the OPP in 2020, over 1,000 frontline constable positions were vacant, representing 26% of the OPP's total funded frontline constable positions. Vacancies in frontline constables appear to be contributing to a decline in the service levels provided by the OPP to municipalities. Despite increasing reported incidents of crime and calls for service in recent years, and an increase in the number of municipalities and population that the OPP serves, the number of hours of patrol that the OPP provided to municipalities and on provincial highways decreased by 28% from 2016 to 2020, from 1.36 million hours to just over 975,000 hours. In our audit of the Ontario Motor Vehicle Industry Council, we noted that OMVIC, as it is known, has been accumulating larger surpluses and reserves instead of using the revenues it generates to enhance and improve consumer protection. The Ontario Clean Water Agency provides drinking water and wastewater treatment services to an estimated 4.5 million Ontarians. Our audit found that Aqua, as it's known, provides safe and reliable drinking water and reliable wastewater treatment services in compliance with legislation. Our audit on homelessness determined that the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing does not have an overarching strategy that effectively coordinates actions for the reduction of homelessness with other provincial ministries, municipalities, and other third-party service providers. Most of the work being done to tackle homelessness is city-specific, and as a result, there exists only a patchwork of data, making it difficult to systematically understand the state of homelessness in Ontario. We found that municipalities also did not have effective processes to monitor third-party service providers and did not have sufficient consolidated information confirming whether people who are homeless are provided with the needed supports and services. Our audit on personal protective equipment supply is included in our annual report and represents Chapter 6 of the COVID-19 Preparedness and Management Special Report. The audit confirms that Ontario was unprepared to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic with sufficient PPE as a result of long-standing issues identified but not addressed by the ministry, dating back as early as the SARS outbreak in 2003. Our audit on the inspection and maintenance of the province's bridges and culverts confirmed that the Ministry of Transportation performs inspections every 2 years on every bridge it is responsible for as required. By keeping bridges in good repair, the Ministry is providing reliable mobility for people and goods in Ontario. Our reports also highlight issues in a third thematic area, that of board governance. This year, our audits identified a need for continued attention to the fundamentals of good board governance, including delays in appointments, absent term limits, and lack of criteria in establishing board member competencies. Since November 2019, Ontario Place has been without any board members, and as a result, there have been no board members to sign off on the financial statements. The timely appointment of board members is important for ensuring that organizations are well governed and meet their respective mandates. Our audit of the OMVIC, Ontario Motor Vehicle Industry Council, found an representation of motor vehicle dealers on the board, 9 of 12 board members, despite being a consumer protection agency. Further, with no term limits, we found that some board members had served over 14 years on the board, holding key positions such as chair and vice chair and secretary-treasurer. In our audit of the Ontario Securities Commission, we found that the government did not follow the established processes for board appointments twice in 2019. We also found existing board members tended to have backgrounds in industry rather than investor protection. Including some board members with experience in investor protection or a clear investor protection outlook would assist the Commission in fulfilling its mandate to protect investors. In our audit of public colleges oversight, we found that board governance of public colleges could be strengthened in areas such as board member training, conflict of interest processes, and board evaluations. In our report on Internet gaming in Ontario, we highlighted our concern that the governance structure of iGaming Ontario, a legal subsidiary of the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, AGCO, compromises the AGCO's regulatory independence. An inherent conflict of interest has been established in legislation between iGaming Ontario's goal of generating profit-based revenue for the province and the AGCO's goal of effectively administering regulatory oversight of the gaming sector. The fourth thematic area addressed in our reports is that of financial accountability and sustainability. In our report on the public accounts, we highlighted that I signed an unqualified audit opinion on the province's consolidated statements for the year ended March 31st, 2021, and we again raised the risk of the province's growing debt and the related impact of interest expense costs on program expenditures. On the audit of the provincial controllership framework, we identified that further work is needed to strengthen this new framework, to play a clear central accounting oversight role and stronger cross-ministry coordinated financial decision-making. Internal controls need to be strengthened under an attestation process and public financial reporting. Our review of financial reporting of school boards in Ontario confirmed that school board financial statements can be presented in accordance with public sector accounting standards. There are opportunities to improve disclosures on education property tax revenue and transportation partnerships in the notes to the statements. In our audit of public colleges oversight, we found that precedent-setting revenues from international students are integral to the financial sustainability of the public college system in Ontario. In 2020-21, 68% of public colleges' total tuition fee revenue came from international students. However, the Ministry of Colleges and Universities does not have a strategic plan for the sector to help mitigate the risk of a sudden decline in international students. During our 2021 audits, we also found examples where the public sector is leaving money on the table. More could be done to recover funds. For instance, even in a time of COVID-19, care needs to be taken in the distribution of taxpayer dollars. In our audit of COVID-19 economic response and support for businesses, we examined 5 economic recovery programs and found that as a consequence of quick program delivery, eligibility controls were either missed entirely, poorly designed, or not applied. Of the $210 million paid to ineligible recipients under the Ontario Small Business Support Grant, the province does not plan to recover, nor has recovered, any amounts. Of the $16 million paid to ineligible recipients under the Property Tax and Energy Cost Rebates Program, the province has recovered only 5.3% at the time of our audit, with ongoing efforts to recoup the remainder. About 46% of businesses who received a grant received a total of $714 million more under the Ontario Small Business Support Grant than they requested because the grant minimum payment was $10,000. Our audit of Ontario Securities Commission found that between 2011-12 and 2020-21, the Commission collected only 28% of $528 million of monetary sanctions it imposed. Finally, our report includes a section on Laurentian University, highlighting the importance of unfettered access to people and information during an audit, and the fundamental principle of the need for transparency in the use of taxpayer dollars. With one exception, that being Laurentian University, our auditees were cooperative, demonstrated their acceptance of the audit process, and conducted open and transparent discussions with us. They also provided us with the information we needed to complete our work for the legislature and Ontarians. There is respect in the government, the public, and the broader public sectors for our legislation and the role of the Office of the Auditor General, and our office is provided with unfettered access to information. Government and those who work in the public and broader public sectors understand our audit process, but even more, understand and respect that it is the right of the legislature and Ontarians to be provided with information about taxpayer-funded services and the use of taxpayer dollars. They cooperate because they are open to improving their programs, processes, and systems for the benefit of Ontarians, even when an audit points out or confirms the need to improve. Our annual report shows that those who have provided information for these audits understand the critical role of accountability and transparency. It is disappointing and unfortunate that this is not understood by those governing Laurentian University, a broader public sector organization. The Standing Committee on Public Accounts passed a motion for us to conduct a special audit of Laurentian University. An update of our special audit on Laurentian University and the challenges in conducting this audit is included in our annual report. Now, on behalf of my office, I again want to thank the many people in the government and the public and broader public sectors involved in our work for their assistance and cooperation in the completion of this year's audits. I also want to extend my personal thanks to my professional and dedicated team, our excellent panel of external advisors, and the various subject matter experts who shared with us their knowledge and advice during the past year. Further, I want to acknowledge and extend best wishes to Laura Bell, Audit Director, Financial Statements, and Brian Wanchuk, VFM Audit Supervisor, who will be retiring early next year, who had contributed in total over 65 years of service to the office and the legislature. Last but not least, I also want to express my gratitude to the members of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts and all-party committee of the legislature for their support and for their dedicated work on examining the way government spends taxpayer money and the way programs are delivered for the benefits of all Ontarians. Thank you, and I'll now take your questions.
Just now, the Premier was asked about your finding that $210 million in the small business support went to ineligible businesses, and he used the word fraud to describe what happened. Do you agree with that, or is there kind of more nuance to the situation? Like, how did that happen?
No, I think the Premier is correct in using that term for some of those amounts. I think there have been allegations that applications were put in that were fraudulent and that money was moved into bank accounts for people that weren't entitled to receive the money. So I think representing it that way is fair. There's some of it that would be processing errors, maybe just people who applied maybe naively, but I think that's fair to say that some of it is that.
Yeah, I saw, you also found that there's this $11 billion in business support programs, but not enough tracking to really know even if it went to the right people. So is it your opinion that the amount of money that went to the ineligible recipients could be higher than $200 million?
I think what happened at the beginning, because the want to put the money out was there, and then the administrators had to put in systems. At the very beginning, they lacked the internal controls and the design of their systems to enable them to catch problems sooner. So it took a while. They brought in an external consultant. They did the work. So I think the main problems were right at the beginning. Is there a chance that there are maybe a few more out there? I think so, but I think they've captured most of it.
In terms of the timing of this, though, Auditor, I mean, this support program was built over 2 days, I believe your report said. In December, the pandemic started in March, and the government had the ability to look at other programs that the federal government had done as an example to try to fine-tune exactly how this money was going out the door. Do you feel like it's reasonable for them to have not, dotted their T's or dotted their I's and crossed their T's before the program began, or is their claim accurate that they were trying to do this in a rushed manner?
With respect to the programs we looked at, it was true that they were trying to do that in a rushed manner. I think it's better to ask the government in terms of the beginnings of COVID. Did they start planning for grants at that point in time? Based on our work, we think probably more planning would have then helped provide administration more time to design systems to distribute money that wouldn't be called into question as much.
Were you surprised that there were so many businesses that got money, even though they would have declared as little as 2 cents loss?
Yeah, we were surprised. I mean, that's a function of program design, right? So probably the intent is good. The intent is good to give people money. It's the program design that set a minimum amount to distribute of $10,000, and then really looked at only the bottom line impact from, let's say it was April 2019 to April 2020, and then didn't distinguish between a small amount of money being, representative of an application versus somebody that had applied for $10,000 impact. So the design of the program was the problem that led to, more money going to some people who had represented less of an impact in their applications.
With regards to Laurentian University,
Mm-hmm.
how did you get to this point of it being a standoff? And have you ever turned to the courts before to get documentation?
No, we haven't turned to the courts before. I think the reason I filed my application, and it was filed on September 29th, was that it became obvious that even our access to non-privileged information was being impacted, as well as our conversations with people. So an example being sometimes we need to access emails. That was being, we weren't getting all the emails, either the privileged or the non-privileged, because the logic was it would take us lots of time. Laurentian's logic, lawyers' logic, was it would take them lots of time to go through all those emails. And, but that is part of the audit process. So for that reason, and for the reason not being able to sort of talk to people that would be comfortable to talk to us, I filed the application to clarify the definition of privileged.
I also want to ask about the support for families. There's recent allegations of alleged fraud. It's gone to court. Did you look at that at all, or are you going to look at that in the future?
Yeah, in terms of that, I know that there are issues. We have been in contact on that with the ministry, and behind the scenes we have been involved in following up to see whether they're looking at that program. So it is my understanding that the work still continues on that. It isn't a subject of our report this year, though.
On the vacancies at the OPP, I know your report says it's hard to measure the impact on public safety, but can we assume that some municipalities are less safe than that they were?
I think what we saw the impact is there was less ticketing on the highways, as well as the resolution of cases was taking longer in the municipalities that were more impacted by having less constables staffing.
And does the OPP have a plan to fill all these vacancies, or?
I think they're working through the situation. I think it's not uncommon. This situation isn't uncommon for policing. It's happening across Canada. I do think from our discussions that they are trying to address it. The other thing we pointed out in the report, it's not just the number of officers, but the allocation of when they work. So we did find in the report, we highlight that the staffing could be shuffled so that there's more staff available when there is more potential for crime.
On the online cannabis stores, it seemed that there was an issue with minors having too much access, and it seemed that you found yourself looking at the fact that you have minors having access, but if you were to tighten down on it more, or if the government was to tighten down on it more, it would lead them to the illicit market. I'm just trying to understand what's it seems to be pointing in both directions there.
So I think, the legislation does require Cannabis Corporation to ensure that cannabis is not sold to minors. So we looked at the online system that people can purchase cannabis on, and found that there weren't sufficient controls to eliminate the risk, or reduce the risk even, that minors were purchasing cannabis online. We also looked, got an understanding of how the delivery of cannabis works, and did comment on that in the report, that there's more controls around the delivery of cannabis so that minors don't get access to cannabis that way. So we know that legislation requires there to be controls on all of that. I think in our conversations with Cannabis Corporation, their response is that, well, if we put more controls in, the young people will then go to the illicit market, and that's where marijuana is laced with chemicals, and so we don't want that to happen either. So that's the conundrum that we tried to be balanced in the report on those two sides of it, but we did feel, and the reason we raised it is that there is the public would assume right now that there are controls in place so that minors don't get access to cannabis through the online system or through deliveries from the cannabis warehouse.
And just one more on the supports for businesses. It seemed to suggest that the government doesn't really seem to understand if the program has actually done much good and has tracked that side of it. At this point, should they not have figured that part out?
Yeah, we had to. I think part of it is the way the information is consolidated and the way Treasury Board gets information to be able to track information to know what's spent versus not spent. That's one part of the puzzle. But overall, we found that there's about $11.2 billion that were earmarked for economic development type of initiatives, stimulus initiatives, and so we were looking to see. Okay, now you have $11.2 billion. What is the money going to be used for? What is the strategies? What is the logic? And how are you going to know at the end of the day when you spend $11.2 billion whether it's accomplished what you want it to accomplish? So that's, as auditors, that's what we were looking at. Was there a plan? And at the end of the day, do you know that money? How do you know that money will work the way you want it to work?
Along with the $210 million that the government paid to just over 14,000 ineligible businesses and isn't trying to get back. There was $6 million that were paid to, I have my notes here, potentially ineligible ones. Was there any differentiation in why the government chose or is choosing to go after those businesses and not the larger total, or could you not figure that out?
I think part of it is just lack of information. So some parts of it, there's no one to go back to, just by virtue of the way the money was paid out. The other side is, I think we heard that the recovery process might be quite expensive and take longer. I think we reflected in the report, it was really a government decision to not go back and recover that money.
On the land use planning audit, I noticed that the government, especially in the section about MZOs, didn't acknowledge that anything might be wrong and refused to commit to implementing anything. And I'm wondering how often that happens. Like, how often do you encounter a situation where a ministry just completely ignores the audit?
Not often, but we do encounter that. I mean, differences of opinion. So we do put out our view on it and the recommendation, and then, to be fair, we put out the response that the government has to that. I think, the MZO is such a sensitive issue, right? So the timing is of this. We'd actually planned to do this audit a couple years ago, so we had it on our plan. The timing was interesting. But at the end of the day, I think, we respect a different viewpoint, but we still think that given the frequency that these are happening now, that it's time to sit back and kind of say what should be put in place so that there's real clarity for everybody that's involved around when an MZO is used. Because, you'd probably understand if an MZO is used to build a long-term care home, I think people would go, okay, I kind of get it and understand the necessity, as long as it's clear why that decision for that particular developer was made. The other side is if, somebody's building something on a wetland, you'd kind of sit back and go, I need more information, right? So I think we're just saying in our report that when these choices are made and government has 100% ability to do this, just more transparency on it is probably what we need to understand how this is affecting the long-term planning landscape in Ontario.
Okay, and when you said that the way the system is designed right now leaves it vulnerable to conflict of interest, just to be clear, you're not saying that there's any evidence that that's happened, just that it could happen the way that it's currently designed?
Well, I think, when things aren't transparent, people think more about those situations, right? And they call into question decisions, and they look at relationships, they look at the lobby side of things, and so I think it just leaves governments exposed to criticism, And so all we're saying is that, you know what, just put out there how these decisions are being made, why they're being made, and I think the public will understand. I mean, I always look at things, if you're uncomfortable to talk about something, then there must be a concern, right? If transparency kind of, I think we all kind of understand. Even when things aren't working, it's still good to be transparent.
On that same audit, the one greater horseshoe, it seemed that, well, what my takeaways were basically that a lot of the development plans weren't on track. They weren't keeping pace with the rate in the growth of population, and then certain government actions like MZOs were negatively impacting the progress that was supposed to be made. Can there be any line drawn with how that's impacted affordability negatively over the same time that the audit looks at?
I mean, I think, again, that's an excellent question to ask government. I think that's putting a piece of the puzzle into the mix. So land planning should be considering where population growth will happen, the timing of building things, whether there's intensity and densification, or whether there's an acceptance of urban sprawl. So housing is really important, because when we look at the population growth that's happened in the last number of years in Ontario, and then you look ahead to what's expected to be the population growth, it's amazing. And so that's why we're likely seeing, and that's one component of why we're likely seeing increased housing prices, because the supply's not there for the demand.
Okay, we're going to go to the teleconference line. Please go ahead.
Mike Crawley at CBC News.
Hi, Auditor General. In your news release about the support given to ineligible businesses through the Small Business Support Grant Program, you said that, given the amount of money that happened, the absence of better controls is troubling. Can you put into context how troubling this is to you if you add up the $200+ million that went to ineligible businesses and the $700+ million that went to businesses that got more public money than they lost?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes, I think the thing is there needs to be, obviously government makes the decisions, but then administration has to implement those decisions, and according to the intent. And the intent likely is to get money to the people that most need it. But what we saw is that first there were some design issues with the program, but then the IT controls that were built into the screening of the applications, or the controls that weren't there, pose a problem. And so, sometimes people need a little bit more time. Maybe the shortness of the time impacted this. If they had another week, they could have had a better system and been able to save the $210 million from going out the door. So that's why it's disappointing, is that, policy decisions are great, wanting to do something is great, and then there needs to be sufficient time for those that are putting the IT systems in place to be able to make sure the controls are there. So at the end of the day, you achieve your objective of the money going to the right people at the right time.
Follow-up?
Sorry, I just didn't quite hear in that how troubling it is to you. I mean, you use the word troubling in your news release. How troubling is it?
Say it is troubling. I mean, it is very troubling that you have an IT system in place that is distributing, not catching applications that and distributing money to people that might not be entitled to it. So that is troubling. I mean, I think part of the situation is the speed within which those systems, that system in particular, had to be put in place to deal with the distribution of money. But it's a lot of money. $210 million is a lot of money.
Okay, we're going to go back. We're going to go back to the floor. Mike, if you have any more questions, please dial *1 again. I just wanted to follow up on that. So, I mean, obviously you're saying there are IT issues that caused some of this money to go out, but there was a deliberate decision by the government to not go after that $210 million to recoup the cost, to write it off. Is that normal for a government to say $210 million went out the door, okay, we can't recover it, let's just not try?
I think that is it was a decision made by government. I think that's a good question for government. We reported in here in our report that was the reason was the recovery as well as perhaps the inability to recover the money at the end of the day as well.
But during your time as auditor, as an example, have you seen a situation, I mean, this was unprecedented, but even putting that aside, I mean, have you seen a situation in which the government has been defrauded in your terms, in the Premier's terms, and chooses to not refer that fraud to the OPP, chooses to not do anything in its power to try to get that money back? Is there precedence for that?
Yeah, so I think part of it is, it's a trade-off. I'm not saying I agree with not recovering the money. I'm just saying that is the decision. That was the decision of the government not to recover the money. Have we seen situations in previous audits where we have identified situations where we think money should be recovered? Yes, we have. It's many of the reports we've issued over the years identify overpayment to physicians or situations with coroners where we think money should be recovered. So that's part of our process to put it out there. The final decision is government and the administration in terms of how much work they want to put into recovering money and whether they, in their view, think they can recover it. Yeah.
Something about that Ontario Together Fund finding with the perceived conflict of interest about the CEO of the company that got $2.5 million and he or she was on the COVID vaccine task force. I didn't see the name of the company. Are you able to say?
If it's not in the report, no. But I think what I would say there is our point in pointing it out was that there was a conflict of interest process, so that there should have been a declaration. So in these cases, it creates even a higher perception of a problem when there's not a declaration that there is no conflict of interest. So we pointed out because there should have been due diligence there to complete a conflict of interest declaration, as was required under the program.
I'm just wondering, why wouldn't you be able to say in the report?
Well, we usually stick to what is in our report. And so if it's not in our report, it's in our working papers, and we don't speak to the working papers in a public way. I just, leave that one with me and let me see if there's another context in which we've mentioned it. And I can, if you want to leave your card, I can get back to you. Right now, if it's not mentioned in the report, I'd have to say that I can't say anything right now. But.
When it comes to that lack of a declaration, you were talking about how sometimes, I guess, the speed in which the money is going out the door is Premier Ford was talking about earlier, is that's where I guess some slip-ups can, I guess, be accepted. But is there ever a point where the speed in all of this should be accepted when it comes to a lack of a declaration? I realize it was a fluid situation. I'm just wondering if you feel that the timing of it all really made up for anything like that.
Could you ask that question one more time?
It's muddied up in my brain here, so.
Yeah.
No, it's just we've talked about obviously, the $210 million and how everything was very fluid and the money was going out the door very quickly. But you just mentioned the fact that there was a lack of a declaration and a conflict of interest there. Is that acceptable even when timing is very quickly in a program like this?
No, it's not acceptable. That's why we're reporting it, because there should have been a declaration of conflict of interest.
Anyone else from the floor?
Yeah. Did Aqua say why it was so set on getting all of its costs recovered from helping First Nations with their water issues? Did they explain why that was so important to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go back to the history of Aqua, it's there. It's a public sector organization meant to basically facilitate for organizations that can't cover the costs, having water treatment and wastewater operations monitored. At the end of the day, I think there's a bit of a quandary here. You have to have a positive bottom line at the end of the day. So they tried to balance what they do in that organization by, in some cases, charging. And they moved to a model where they decided that they wouldn't do services if they couldn't charge. So we wrote in the report, we brought it up that we think there's a balance that needs to be reassessed and decided upon. And so they don't have jurisdiction. I mean, the province, it is federal responsibility to look after quality of water First Nations, but they do have part of their mandate to provide some assistance. And so we're in the report, we just bring that up and we say, you know, perhaps you need to sit back and look and see whether or not you can be providing more assistance under your current mandate, so that you, in some cases, if money's not available to be paid to you, it's okay. Maybe there's an offset with other contracts that Aqua has.
There's sort of a concept that gets bandied around in this building a few times called like jurisdictional ping pong, where it seems like First Nation issues sort of get tossed back and forth between the provincial and federal government, and this government has promised to do something about boil water orders. Is it your impression from the work you guys have done on this that there is significant progress on boil water orders? There's saying that there's construction or planning on a lot of these places.
So, you know, our recommendation is that they look at that area and they do more. That is our recommendation. So as to how they're going to handle that going forward, that'll be a discussion, you know, between Aqua and the government. And when we go back in 2 years, we'll see how they've progressed and if they're handling any more of those situations more proactively.
If there's no more on the floor, we're going to wrap up with a question on the phone line. Please go ahead.
Mike Crawley, CBC News.
Hi again, Auditor. Just on a couple of slightly different topics. So you mentioned the Ontario Motor Vehicle Industry Council. How concerned should people be out there buying a used vehicle, thinking that this grouping or agency is supposed to be protecting them?
Well, number one, I think the key is awareness that they exist. I think what we've highlighted is they are closing files more than we think they should when they find there are issues. So I think if OMVIC takes to heart and implements the recommendations that we put forward, and we have no reason to believe not, that as a consumer in Ontario you should feel better. Do we think that there's more work that they need to do to provide consumer protection? Yes.
Okay, and the other question is on your findings about how big a proportion of tuition fee revenue for public colleges is coming from international students. It's more than 2/3 of all their revenue. What's the risk of that? Why does it matter that such a high proportion of colleges' tuition fee revenue comes from international students?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a high percentage, 68% of the tuition fee from international students, that if the borders are closed, if there's a country where there's an issue that Canada has and they stop sending their students or allowing their students to come, then the financial viability of some of the colleges in Ontario comes into question. The other alternative is for the province to then fund more the college system for the domestic students. So it is really a financial sustainability issue, where at some point maybe international students will pick another country as their primary country of choice. And so Ontario needs to be prepared. I think we have in the report 62% of the students currently come from India. So if there ever was, some kind of restriction, when we think back what's been in the paper about Laurentian, one of the issues there was they lost student revenue from an international contract. So it's not that doesn't happen.
Okay. There are no further questions. Auditor, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate it. She's only like this, my dog. She's really cute. Anyway, have a good day. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, everyone, give us a few minutes to just reset the room. There's going to be several ministers coming, including Health Minister Christine Elliott, Prabmeet Sarkaria, Minister Bethlen Falvey, and Minister Clark. Minister Sarkaria will be making a quick statement before the other ministers are available. So queue up. Please dial *1 if you have any questions now, and we'll try to alternate or try to get through as many people as possible. Thank you.
Flag guys go. Oh, no. I just want to, whenever they're ready. Randy, I'm going to ask you to count here for a second. Just count to 10 while I check the audio. Okay. It's only an audio.
Wait, no, not a good time. No. Not a good time.